Senator David Perdue's campaign says he will quarantine after coming into contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19. According to a statement from the campaign, Perdue was notified of the exposure Thursday morning. The campaign added that Perdue and his wife both tested negative on Thursday, but will quarantine per his doctor's recommendations and CDC guidelines. Perdue is running to keep his seat in next Tuesday's Senate runoff election in Georgia. Thursday was the last day of early voting in the state. More than 2.5 million people have already voted in the election. At least 91,000 of those votes are from people who did not vote in November's presidential election. That's led to some long lines at early voting sites across the state, like the one seen here in Marietta. As the race enters its final days, President Trump is lashing out at Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp. The president has falsely claimed there was widespread voter fraud in the state during the November election. He's even called on Kemp to resign. A reminder, 3 recounts in Georgia confirmed President-elect Joe Biden's victory in the state. Here's what Governor Kemp said about the president's comments on Wednesday.
All of these things are a distraction. I mean, I've supported the president. I've said that many times. I worked as hard as anybody in the state on his reelection up through November the 3rd. I've supported the legal process that him or any other campaign can go through in this state. But at the end of the day, I also have to follow the laws and the Constitution.
For more, I want to bring in CBS News 2020 campaign reporter Adam Brewster. He's at an early voting site in Marietta, Georgia. Adam, welcome. We also mentioned the record early voting numbers in the Peach State. What does that tell us, and what's driving the turnout in this race?
We actually have just recently gotten some updated numbers, Omar. It's more than 2.8 million people through yesterday and more than 100,000 who didn't vote in November. And that's one of the numbers that everyone is curious about, these people who didn't vote in November, whether they're people who have recently turned 18, perhaps recently moved to the state, or whether they're people who didn't necessarily feel compelled to vote in November, but are now suddenly feeling motivated to get out there and cast a ballot. And as far as what's motivating people, typically runoffs see a major drop in turnout. Now, we don't know if turnout will hit the numbers that we saw in November, but the message is pretty clear here, right? The control of the United States Senate is in the balance. Everyone here in Georgia understands that. When you talk to voters, speak to people supporting Republicans, they feel that this is something that they need to do to protect their values. They often say this is their stance against socialism. That's certainly something the candidates say. And when you speak to Democrats, they say if President-elect Biden wants to get anything done, we need to put these 2 Democrats in. The message is very clear. The stakes are very clear to both sides, and that is, I think, why you are seeing so many people vote in elections that typically, see a significant drop in turnout.
We heard some of Governor Kemp's response to President Trump's attacks, and keep in mind, Governor Kemp is a Republican, same party as the president. The president has sharply criticized officials in Georgia over baseless claims of voter fraud. Is there any worry among the Republicans there in Georgia and also D.C. that these attacks could have a negative impact as we're closer to Election Day, that it may force people to stay home or just tune it out?
I think we'll get a better sense of that into next week once those numbers come in. But as far as concerns, when we've spoken to Republicans, when my colleagues down here, including Caitlin Huey-Burns, have talked to Republicans at Republican events, they are all feeling incredibly motivated because they view the stakes are high. Now, I did pass a billboard on my way here to Marietta, that had pictures of Senators Loeffler and Perdue that essentially said, they aren't fighting for President Trump. We don't need to fight for them. But, the belief is that this is not impacting a large number of people, if really any people. I don't know how much Democrats are necessarily banking on that happening. We've seen Republicans, even though turnout in Democratic areas has been a little higher than some of the more solidly Republican areas. I think everyone knows and learned in November that Republicans are willing to vote on Election Day, and so nobody is counting any chickens before they hatch because there is still a lot of time left, even as early voting is wrapping up today.
President Trump and President-elect Biden and also Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are all going to be campaigning in Georgia next week. What might we expect to hear from them, and how much impact do you think that's going to have on the final days of the race?
Well, anyone who still hasn't voted, it could be that extra thing that puts you over the top. You might hear one final thing, or somebody who watches the speech may give you some extra nugget of information that they heard. Certainly for President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, we can probably expect to hear them talk about how they think that anything that they want to get done, their agenda, is on the line, and the ability to get some of the bigger things done they believe could be there. Of course, if Democrats sweep both the seats, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris would be in a position to cast tie-breaking votes on potentially, divided pieces of legislation. And as far as President Trump, I mentioned that there has been some, lagging turnout in some of the more conservative areas, but that will be the final message. He may come down to Georgia, and he'll likely talk about some of the issues he felt happened in November, repeat some of the claims of fraud, the debunked, baseless claims of fraud. But he will be there and tell people, you may be upset about November, and this is what Republicans also say, you may be upset about what happened, but I need you to come out there, and I need you to support these two Republican senators because there is so much at stake, and there is too much on the line to sit at home. And that might be that final message, especially as some Republicans in some conservative areas appear to be waiting until Tuesday to cast their ballots.
I was in Georgia earlier this month, and there are a lot of campaign ads on the airwaves down there. Those will also end on Election Day. Adam Brewster, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Omar. Happy New Year.
And be sure to stay with CBSN on Tuesday all day for full coverage of the Georgia elections. We'll have a special 2-hour edition of Red and Blue and election results as they come in throughout the night.